All right, I think we are ready. Let me get to gallery view so I can see all of your smiling faces. Um, we want to direct your attention to the chat box, of course, for your questions. Um, and this reminder from Barbara is probably for the Black Baptist preacher that we're looking for questions and not comments, no sermons, but questions. What questions bubble up for you? Certainly want to hear that. Um, and certainly I offered some questions up in the beginning of this piece, namely around capitalism and what you made of the critique of capitalism. As we watched and listened, you heard comments about capitalism sprinkled throughout the piece in different ways. From the origin story, where it sounds like two of the founders were talking about, when this co-op was established in the 70s, it was in a particular political context, anti-war context, a context criticized, anti-capitalism context. And so that context had shape, but interestingly enough, the thread of that critique came up in some of the members' conversations as well. And so certainly invite any other questions that bubble up for you around capitalism. And I have a question related to that in 1 second and a definition. But I also asked us to think about the significant reordering of people's lives. 2 hours and 45 minutes every 4 weeks. And then we heard from the enforcer, a person who, if you were trying to get away with stealing time or putting an extra little something in your bag, they even have a prosecutor in the group ready to make phone calls and call you to carpet. And so all those kinds of questions or any other questions that come to mind. Before we dive in with your questions, all of us are pretty much kind of Zoom experts now. But I am curious. I'm curious about your understanding of capitalism. I'm on sabbatical right now, and one of the things I'm doing is writing a book. And as a part of my book, what I found out quickly was I needed to brush up and do much more work in the way of understanding political economic theory. I needed to brush up on understanding capitalism. And I realized that nowhere along my schooling, and I've been to all the schools, but I could not recall a class where someone actually taught me about capitalism. Can I see the hands of those? And there's a couple of screens, I'm gonna go back and forth. Can I see the hands or the emoji thumbs of those who share my experience and have never had a class on capitalism, never had a class, never read a book, never really got, nuts and bolts. Let me scroll through my screens here. There's a lot of y'all. Okay, all right. So there's a number of us. I see you. Thanks, Nancy. I see hands and thumbs. Yeah, a number of us never had a class. And I think about it sometimes a little bit, and you can funnel your questions to Dr. Gooch Grayson, and I'll pass the ball to Dr. Gooch Grayson for any questions that might come through. But it makes me think about, I can describe my experience in a society shaped by capitalism, but it's difficult for me to define what actually constitutes capitalism. And I guess we are swimming in the waters of capitalism so much, it could be like asking a fish to describe water. Mm-hmm. I probably could better describe water once you take me out of it. Now I'm flopping around like, wait, put me back. And so to ask me to describe capitalism, it may be that I have to see or experience life outside of that economic system. And then once we back up off of it, okay, now I can get a better panoramic, view of capitalism and what it is. Let me share with you this definition, and then I'm going to pitch for any other questions that come along. And it's just because it connected so with pieces of this, this documentary. So I went to various sites to try to find, because I'm studying this, y'all. What is capitalism? Ended up bumping into the International Monetary Fund to get their definition. I was like, nah, wait a minute, maybe not y'all, maybe not the IMF or the World Bank. Let me go to somewhere else. And so I went to my cousin Britannica, and Britannica says, capitalism is an economic system in which investment in and ownership of the means of production, distribution, and exchange of wealth is made and maintained chiefly by private individuals or corporations, especially as contrasted to cooperatively or state-owned means of wealth. And when capitalism talks about the means of production, it's talking about factories. It's talking about railways. It could be talking about mines, the means of production. And as I've studied and done a little bit of reading as well about capitalism and socialism and other economic systems, there's a distinction in socialism between personal property and private property. And so when I was doing some reading around socialism, it does not mean that I don't have a house that I own and live in. But it does mean that a private corporation can't own a waterfall or the rights to water or seeds even. That's public property for the common good. Those are some things that have bubbled up for me in terms of what I've read so far. And I welcome any other resources that might be there. Share those with Dr. Gooch Grayson, that we might hear those too, and or any other related matters related to this documentary on a food co-op. Dr. Gooch Grayson, anything else come up? Questions?
Absolutely, Reverend Brown. The chat is hopping. And so the first question for you and us, I'm going to combine some of them because they're very similar. Does Omaha have anything like this? And then another one that was from one of our veteran participants, Manifest. Thank you for your service, Manifest. And from Dr. Umberger, who is faculty here. She says, I shopped and worked at food co-ops when I lived in DC and Maryland, but don't see them here in the Great Plains. Do you, Reverend Brown, have numbers on total US food co-ops? And do those numbers break down by red and blue states?
I have no clue, Mary. But I'm gonna jot it down. It's a good question. And I love the caveat there, the question around red or blue states and what kind of political personality or character influences this as well. Because in my experience, Mary, to this point, around food with the Black Church Food Security Network, we have seen food be an equalizer of sorts, meaning no matter where you show up in terms of your political ideology, there is a common concern and common appreciation, of course, for nutrient-rich food, and a recognition of the barriers that allow as many as possible to gain access to nutrient-rich food and ownership and agency with respect to their food systems. So, and especially in the religious sphere, we work with Baptist, Pentecostal, Apostolic, all different kinds of religious groups. And even across denominations, it's like whether a pastor immerses or sprinkles or blesses babies or whatever, it's like, listen, we sweet potatoes don't have any kind of theological, doctrinal debate or dogma we got to fight about. When we get to the place we fight about sweet potatoes, we all going to hell. Everybody going to hell. It's sweet potatoes. And so I wonder, with respect to food co-ops, if it has the same effect. So I appreciate your question. Whether it's a red state or a blue state or purpley or whatever, is there an appreciation for and recognition of some type of involvement with this kind of connection? In terms of food co-ops around the country, I do not have those numbers before me, but I do believe that there are, and maybe I'll try to grab the site real quick, there are national organizations that do keep track of those numbers, and I'm sure they have some data around somewhere.
Reverend Brown, thank you for that response. Another question is, what do you think we can use from this philosophy and operation of the co-op to encourage participation at activities related to other organizations?
Mm. I loved what this documentary did in reinforcing in my mind the significance of kind of the deep work that will be necessary to really transform and change the material conditions related to food in our local communities. After 16 some years, there's a whole lot of work that this group has done and that they had to do in the beginning. In fact, we caught pieces of it through the piece. There's a group in Paris who are looking to start a food co-op there, and they've since started. I actually did some poking around. That co-op has since started based off of their visit to Park Slope. And so I think about, so they flew from France to Brooklyn to study this group, did a documentary, go back, and I'm sure did a whole lot more in the way of study as well. And it makes me think about the need for, it's just a high commitment. I'll just say that. It's just a high level of commitment to study, to sacrifice, to, I'm sure there was some political education that went on in the early going. And then along the way, learning different systems, volunteer management. As you saw, they have, I wrote it down, they got a bi-weekly newspaper. They have a number of committees. They have events and lectures and films that they do. So they have a lot going on. And I just know it's far easier to have a good idea about a food co-op than it is to actually roll up your sleeves and do it. And so I would just, for all of us working in food who have any kind of hankering around this type of work, I probably would say start very small and go very slow. I would say very small and very slow, and then brick by brick, do this work.
Thank you. From Nancy Smith, our friend in scholarships, when did we like Nancy because she helps us get money for our students.
We love you, Nancy.
When did capitalism start with groceries? Didn't we trade items, share items, etc., with our family, with our friends, neighbors, community?
That's funny hearing this from the money lady, but it's so true that yes, Nancy, as I'm doing the reading and studying, and I got a lot more studying to do, but prior to capitalism, the economic systems, you're right, bent more in the direction of bartering and exchanging. And of course, there was a feudalism system as well. But I think it's very important, what I appreciate about your comment and your question is that it's important for us who all we've known in our entire natural born lives is one economic system. It is important for us to remember that this economic system had a birth date. And as you heard from one of the persons in the documentary, they're saying it also has a death date because the system is not going to last. But it's important, I think, to study economic systems prior to capitalism. And what I've been doing a lot of is studying other countries in the world right now that do not embrace a capitalism as an economic system, or have some kind of hybrid economic system that has some pieces of capitalism and some pieces of socialism. You know what I mean? And so those type of countries tend to come up when we talk about healthcare. When we're talking about our healthcare and health systems, there are certain countries that tend to come up in the conversation. Like places like, I think, Sweden, and the Netherlands, Cuba, of course. When we're thinking about healthcare comes up, you know what we don't think about in terms of like more of a socialistic kind of system? We don't think about the fire department as a system of, that's not a capitalist system. You call that number, that truck is coming, right? Not based on how much money you have, whatever, right? And there are other systems as well that we have little sprinkles, in my opinion, of more of a cooperative economic system and not an economic system primarily based on profit and how much money can we make the fastest?
Thank
I'll cut my
you.
responses down short because I know time
Oh,
is.
no, you're fine. Thank you, Chelsea and Chef Brian O'Malley. Thank you for being here. They provided local co-op information, Omaha Harvest.coop, as well as nebraskafood.org. Another question came in: what can business owners and supervisors learn about the co-op work environment that was attractive to the members? Could much of this philosophy also flourish in paid work environments? What do you think, Reverend?
Yeah, I think so. Um, it's funny. One of the things I thought about after watching this piece, I thought about the church's work environment, and I thought about, sadly, and I'm ashamed to say this, but for many religious institutions, notwithstanding the sermons and messages and the high moral capital and all of the feel goods that are preached about, taught about, etc., many religious institutions struggle and suffer from not the best work environments. And I've heard it over and over again. And so I think there's something to be said here, not only for religious institutions, but yes, also for businesses, to think about what does it look like and what could it look like to better honor the safety of workers, the respect and dignity of workers, the pay of workers. Interestingly enough, as I was digging around even on the Park Slope story, I found that the workers there attempted to unionize, and they raised some concerns about the work environment and about some of the other challenges that they had. You'll find it online if you look it up. This might have been 2008, 2009, something like that. But it was very interesting to me. And they got, according to this one article I read, there was a little bit of pushback from the directors of the co-op. And so it was a little bit of a friction, point of friction there that I think eventually got resolved. But it just goes to show, at least for me, is, even if you have a very sharp ideological analysis that says we want to set up something that's very different than anything that's out there, if you're not careful, because of, I think in part, the social and economic environment that we're in, we can very much so drift into becoming what you said you'd never be, or drift into becoming the type of system that you had such strong convictions against when you started. And so one of the questions I would have for Park Slope today is, what kind of ongoing political education happens in your group so that you're keeping yourself honest to what the values and the principles that you said inspired you to start in the beginning? Because I'm not sure if member number 16,000, who's just excited about getting chocolate at a cheaper rate, is as committed to the theory and the ideology that brought y'all together in the first place. So that's a whole lot there. But yeah, I think it says a lot about how we could do more. Oh, wait, I got to say this. Is anybody else following what's going on in Bessemer in Alabama with Amazon workers?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's happening right now. And they had this week where they was like, listen, nobody buy from Amazon Prime members, all that kind of stuff. And don't buy this week. We want to pressure them so that we honor the workers. So these are issues that are happening right now in the country. And I think,
hey, it's hard. It's happening right here with meat packers, right here in Nebraska.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Workers are protesting.
Well, social activists are protesting because they work in dire environments, not social distance, not vaccinated, and so on. But they're expected to show up and do the work, and they're trying to take care of their families. They're getting sick. So others are speaking on their behalf, and it's gone down. There's a bill in place at the state legislature. Okay, I have another question. Can you tell me efforts, starting with Pleasant Hope Baptist Church in Baltimore, Maryland, that are working to diminish food access issues across marginalized communities?
Absolutely. So for us, one of the first things we did at our church is we just started growing on the land that we own. And if you remember, even in the documentary, as someone was talking about how that neighborhood has changed so much, they said that the reason why the co-op is still there is because they own their building. And so with a similar kind of mentality, we said 10 years ago at our church, listen, we're not gonna be able to change all the dynamics in the city with respect to food overnight, but with the land that we own, we do have greater agency to say, well, let's just plant some seeds. And any gardeners, where are my gardeners at? Farmers, gardeners, those who grew up on the farm. You know that in many cases, one seed will produce a great harvest. My favorite, I'm gonna show y'all my cans, wait a minute. So all my little mason jars, right? This is last summer's harvest. This is my survive the pandemic work. This is like, listen, bro, to stay mentally, emotionally, and physically sane, we are growing and canning like Big Mama used to do. And what I learned and what I was reminded of, one black bean in the soil produces 50 black beans by the time it's harvested. So I think about what our church did. I got so excited about it. And then I started to say, what could happen if we work with other churches to create a systemic alternative food system that is just utilizing land that churches already own. And we already spend money on it. We just make it look pretty, right? I guess heavenly lawns need to be well manicured at the edges and all that. Listen, and I'm like, what would God require with the blessings of the land that we have? And so that's the sermon I go around preaching to anybody who will listen, like, let's utilize the land that we have and grow food. And so we love that that's happening. The last quick thing I'll say is the other reason why we focus on organizing churches is because there are very real power dynamics in play when you think about the food insecurity challenges in your neighborhood or in neighborhoods that you know. It's not just a matter of food access per se, but I also talk about food agency. Because as long as, it's kind of like that, it's kind of my love-hate relationship with the word empower. As long as you can empower someone else, you have left the power dynamics in place that makes them dependent on what you can give them. I'm going to empower you. No. I want the kind of scenario where you have recognized and are celebrated for your own power, and our power links up together to create a more socially just community. But I don't want to be in a position where I have to empower you. Similar with food access. You can do all the food charity you want to in the whole wide world. But if you never address the hole at the bottom of the bucket that has these communities hungry in the first place, then sure, your charity experiences will feel good. You'll go home, you'll feel great at night. But listen, another meal will be needed in a week. And I think that's what we've seen even with the pandemic. A lot of wonderful food outreach, and I'll never disparage it. But I just want people to look further down the line at the deeper horizon and say, just the mere fact that we have to keep doing this is a sign that something is fundamentally and systemically wrong, and no amount of charity is going to fix it.
Thank you. Question, we are going to take just a few more questions. One from Dr. Lillian Peterson. From an economic perspective, when 40% or more government intervention than socialism, where are we currently in the US?
With what was with 40% or more government intervention?
Yes, than socialism. Dr. Peterson, can you provide a little more information on that question? And then I will go to another question from James Hawthorne. Dr. Brown, last year while you were presenting at MCC, You mentioned that your local church grows and sells fresh produce at a price point that is much lower than grocery store chains in your area. How has this benefited your local community and church parishioners? Is this something that you believe more churches should get involved with?
Absolutely, Reverend Hawthorne. I think that we absolutely should. One of the things that we recognized very quickly was, as we saw in this documentary, labor was a very high cost, is a very high cost for grocery stores. What we find in our churches is we have very deeply committed volunteer bases already that run programming and all kinds all year long. So what could it look like to steer that committed base in the direction of food? And so that's what we've seen. And then also, because our church already owns the real estate of the building itself that sits largely underutilized Monday through Saturday, how can we ensure that we are either repurposing or best utilizing that church kitchen, the multi-purpose room, the church van? I mean, it's an embarrassment of riches when it comes to the material assets of your local synagogue, mosque, or church that sits there. And I know of people who can utilize that kitchen for incubator spaces for their business. Chefs on here. Chefs could be in that space doing community culinary programs, that Wi-Fi and those computer labs and all that type of stuff. And so I just love thinking through, how do we take what we already have? Some people call it asset-based community development. And starting with what you already have in your hand, as opposed to the starting point being, we're deficient, we don't have enough, we don't know enough, we need the experts to fly in from out of town to come tell us. I say no, let's start with what we have, with what we know. And I just believe, and yes, I'm a man of faith, I just believe you take one step, and I believe that God will take two, and faith will open a door and stuff and help you in ways that you don't know even yet, but you got to take that step first.
Okay, I have another question from Dr. Peterson. That's a great incentive on produce production. How do you protect the garden? That's her question. Very
Yes,
good one.
a pastor asked me this yesterday. So quick. So we don't have gate. We don't have a lock rather on our garden. We have a greenhouse that's unlocked. We don't have issues with respect to vandalism or theft or anything. But I will say we do a whole lot of work in our community, connecting with our neighbors. And so there's a sense of shared ownership and responsibility for the space that we have. I do know of some other church gardens that we have that have had some issues. But oftentimes, I mean, vandalism and the like, it's a breakdown in relationship or communication, it's a breakdown in connection somewhere. And so while a quick fix might be a lock or a combination code, I think the longer term solution is knocking on doors and being a good neighbor and just being serious and intentional about everybody in the neighborhood feeling like they own a piece of it, because it's much harder to trash stuff that I feel like I own a piece of this.
Mhm.
I think that's what the food co-op does with theirs. People give 2 hours and 45 minutes every 4 weeks. They own it. They own a piece of it. There's no bosses. And I think if we can mirror or model and mimic that, it goes a long way in addressing issues around protection and security.
Thank you. I believe that concludes the majority of our questions. Oh, wait, I have one more. I thought I asked it, but Barbara told me I did not. What do you suppose happens to members who truly age out and perhaps can no longer carry out their responsibilities at the co-op, but would still want to shop? They're physically not able to do some of the tasks.
Yeah, right before we got on, I was curious about that myself. And there is something on their website about those. It's in their FAQ for those that retire out or for those that have like catastrophic health challenges and something changes in their lives. So apparently they have, I didn't go deep into it, but apparently they have some type of retirement program. But also I appreciated the fact that they had thought through so many different lanes and avenues of service, whether it's phone calls or labeling or scrubbing. Differently abled people could plug in and find a way to connect. And they seem to have a committee that really works to match people based on what skills, gifts, and abilities they have for the task. Can I challenge before we go? Can I challenge because I'm coming back there. Y'all brought me there recently. I'm coming back to Metro at some point. And I would love for there to be some type of group. And maybe there's some people on this screen who are.
I got Chef O'Malley on tap right now. He's looking at me. He doesn't see me, but I see him. But the next time you come back, we're gonna link the two of you together. Awesome. And Chef, we did take him, and he did have an opportunity to dine in the facility. So
I did. It was awesome.
It was awesome. And I'm sorry, go ahead. We're gonna link you two up for certain.
I'm looking forward to it. I would say, and I'm inspired by this documentary too, I think a whole lot needs to happen in the way, as I said earlier, of political education and small, study groups, book clubs. The impulse is to roll up our sleeves and just do it. But what we saw, y'all, was like the finished product of a whole lot of study and labor. And I just don't want any of us to get so excited that we just jump out there and say, yeah, we're starting a food co-op tomorrow. And so I wonder what it could look like, whether it's in Omaha, whether it's Baltimore or wherever, small groups of committed people to say, let's just read, whether it's about capitalism, whether it's about food co-ops, what is about the food business. Let's just commit to study it and take a long walk together. And I think the marathon would get us that much closer to something that makes sense for your context with the people you're in community with.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Brown. First of all, thank you for coming last year, right before we shut down. Like almost, we are about a year and a week out from when you were here last, and happy to see you and happy that you consider MCC folks your family. We certainly consider your church our family. And hopefully we can continue this relationship, and that next year you can come back, and maybe not even next March. Maybe it's in the fall. It's beautiful here in the fall when things are safer for everyone. So thank you again for your connection and saying yes to us. Thank you, faculty, staff, students, participants, community members, for being on here this afternoon. You could be lots of other places, virtually or in person, but you chose to spend the afternoon with us and learn more about the food co-op movement and capitalism, socialism, and food, something that we all need. And I just want for those, I don't know if Reverend Cavett is still here, but she is a dynamic activist, as well as many others on here. I just desire that we get rid of the food desert that is in Northeast Omaha, and that, people say Walmart on 52nd and Ames. Well, that's not the near north side. And we just need a decent, nice grocery store for folks in North and South Omaha, because in South Omaha, Hy-Vee's gone now. That was near our campus. So yes, we have Aldi's, and I like Aldi's. I'm not taking anything away from Aldi's, but a full service, why don't we deserve that? But that was a little documentary, or a little blurb actually, that I didn't anticipate to say, but I said it anyway because I got the mic. But now I'm gonna drop it, right? So again, thank you. We hope that you will join us in future Diversity Matters book and lecture series. And thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Posey. Thank you, Sharon Lee. Thank you, James Hawthorne. And again, thank you everyone for attending today. Again, complete the online evaluation at mccneb.edu/IIEEVAL. Portia Cavett, Reverend Cavett is on here. Thank you for all the work you do in our community. Thank you for being a vaccine site. Tomorrow starts the first day that the Metro Community College Fort Omaha campus will be a vaccine site. We're a testing site at both campuses as well. But appreciate your work, Pastor Cavett. The next program, as indicated on the screen, is the Yellow Envelope. And that discussion will be led by Katie Twitt, Thursday, April 8th. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.